I never thought that my long-awaited vacation on board the cruise liner Celesta would turn into a nightmare. Departing from the port of Miami, we were to follow a route through the Caribbean Sea to the shores of Costa Rica. The first few days were magnificent. I enjoyed sailing with wonderful people. We talked, joked, and ate a lot of delicious food. On the third day of sailing, when the sun warmed the sea waves to a shine and the connection with the shore was perfect, suddenly everything changed. The connection was cut off as if by magic. At first, I thought it was just a technical malfunction, but then real madness began. I was standing at the helm, talking to the captain's assistant, when I first heard about the unexplained signals on the radar.
They appear and disappear very quickly. We can't keep track of them,
he said with confusion, pointing to the flickering dots on the screen. That night, malfunctions began. The music in the lobby faded, the lights flickered intermittently, and the air conditioning failed. Such things had happened on this vessel before, so we did not take these troubles as something very serious. But the next morning, we discovered that one of the passengers, a man from cabin 207, had vanished without a trace. His personal belongings were in place, and the cabin was locked from the inside, but he himself had disappeared as if evaporated. No one could find him. Rumors spread among the passengers faster than fire. Perhaps he fell overboard. People were in a panic. I tried to keep to the side of this, trying to find a rational explanation for what was happening. But every time the abnormal signals reappeared on the radar, someone disappeared. Without a trace, without warning. The ship's crew tried to maintain calm, but the tension was felt in every move they made. Within 3 days, 4 had already disappeared, and everyone talked about some sort of curse. People began to suspect each other, thinking that someone was intentionally kidnapping people. Now, people locked themselves in their cabins and refused to come out. I began to watch the radar myself, trying to catch a pattern. But the anomalies continued to appear chaotically, unpredictably. The connection was lost. Now, we did not know where or what course we were following. On the 6th day, I decided to spend the night in the wheelhouse. Taking binoculars, I examined the dark waters, searching for an answer. And then I saw it. A strange glow in the waters, right where another anomaly had flickered on the radar. My heart sank. The light of a lighthouse. I tried to convince myself, but there couldn't be a lighthouse there. Dawn was approaching, and the crew was preparing for the worst. Communication with the shore had not been restored, and each of us felt the approach of an unknown threat. And then, as the first rays of the sun glided over the water, the radar once again fixed a signal. But this time, it was constant. It did not disappear, and it was approaching us with incredible speed. I froze, peering into the distant sea. Whatever it was should have been here by now, but I saw nothing. I waited, looking into the darkness, and saw how the surface of the ocean began to rise, forming something huge that moved straight towards us. It sliced through the wave, creating around itself a glowing path of phosphorescent plankton, which seemed to flee from it in panic. The crew froze, and the passengers, watching from the balconies of their cabins, began to utter frightened screams. At first, I thought it might be a whale or some giant sea creature, but its shape was irregular. It kept changing, as if it was made of water, a substance that could not have definitive contours. It was getting closer, and the radar showed that it was now right under the ship. Everything around suddenly fell silent. Even the wind, which until then had continuously roared in the sails, now stilled. The ship's engines suddenly turned off, and Celesta stopped, swaying on the waves like a lifeless island. We looked down into the depths of the dark ocean, and I saw how the water began to froth as if something huge was about to surface. But instead of seeing a creature, we encountered something even more terrifying. A ship began to rise from the depths. Old, rusty, with tilting masts, it rose from the deep like a ghost from the past. A whisper spread among the passengers, and someone uttered a word that gave me chills. Marie Celeste. A well-known ghost ship vanished many years ago. There were many search companies, but no one could ever find the ship. Now, it's right here, in front of us. But who is the captain? What drives this vessel? And most importantly, why did it suddenly surface before us? Who or what now wants something from us? The ship made a full circle around us at great speed, hovered on the waves for a minute as if assessing us, and then began to submerge into the water. As we watched the old ship disappear into the sea depths, our liner unexpectedly started as if nothing had happened. The communication instantly came back to life, and the first message we heard was that we had been considered missing without a trace for the past 45 days. But the strangest was yet to come. When we arrived at the port, we were met not only by rescue services, but also by the families of the missing passengers. They told us that their loved ones had returned home suddenly, while they had no memory of where they had been or how they had gotten ashore. They had absolutely no memory of their journey on the Celesta. To this day, I cannot explain what happened on board the Celesta. But I know one thing. The ocean keeps in its depths far more secrets than we can imagine. And some of them are better left unsolved. I've always loved the sea. It promised adventure, mysteries, and discoveries, but never fear. Not until that night. I was a sailor on the cruise liner Mariana. It took us through the calm waters of the South Atlantic to the South American shores. It was a moonless night, and the sky was littered with stars like never before. Around midnight, our captain urgently changed course. An unexpected SOS signal came through the radio, and the captain immediately altered our direction. But there was nothing in the sea, only the black water and twinkling stars. There are no ships around, no flares, only a quiet, anxious beep from the radio. And then we saw it. The lighthouse. It stood alone in the middle of nowhere. The lighthouse was on a small islet, one that was not marked on any marine chart. It stood on the edge of an underwater mountain. The lighthouse's light seemed bright. It pierced the darkness, slicing through the ocean waves like a knife blade. The captain decided to get closer to see, perhaps, if someone was in trouble and we couldn't make them out. We approached anchor distance, and the captain called together a small volunteer search party. I was among them. Our sailboats drifted across the water, with only the sound of our engines and the slap of the waves against the sides breaking the silence. As we neared the islet, I felt something was off. It was in the air, an electricity that seemed impossible so far out in the open sea. You know, that odd sense of unease. The lighthouse was old, worn, and covered in moss as if it had been standing there very, very long. We began our search. There were no doors or windows on the ground floor, just a dark opening leading inside. Our flashlights barely illuminated the passage. Inside was a staircase spiraling upwards towards the light, coming from the top of the lighthouse. And there we found it, a logbook. The top pages of the log were slightly swollen from moisture, as if the ocean air had been playing a long game of hide and seek with them. We discovered entries dating back decades, echoing the voices of long-gone sailors. They described everyday life at sea, but the deeper we delved into the pages, the more alarming the entries became. June 19, 1917. We rounded the Cape, and fog descended on us like a shawl. The lighthouse we saw yesterday has vanished. Compasses have gone mad. The crew is on edge. July 7, 1917. Many days have passed, but the fog does not clear. The light of the lighthouse is visible every night, changing its position. It's impossible, but now it's to our right, now to our left. Sometimes, it seems to be moving straight towards us. July 21st, 1917. We still follow our course, but the lighthouse moves. We suspect mass hallucinations. Johnson jumped overboard, screamed about voices in the light of the lighthouse. We tried to save him, but the fog swallowed him faster than we could reach. August 2nd, 1917. We decided not to obey the lighthouse's light, but it's futile. Our routes are twisted, as if something or someone is pulling us back. The following pages were torn, stained with spots that resembled old blood, and the entries became increasingly disjointed and mad, speaking of eyes in the depths and singing light that called to them. The last date, it seemed, was added recently, and the ink had not yet fully dried. April 16th, 2023. He has returned. The lighthouse is there again. But now we know, do not look into the light. Do not listen to the song that carries with the waves. It is not a beacon. It is death. At the bottom of the page was a drawing of a lighthouse, from each side of which were twisted figures and faces, seeming to emerge from the very paper, their mouths open as if they were screaming in silent terror. When we read the last entries in the journal, a sense of unease intensified to unbearable levels. The entries remained before my eyes, even when I blinked as if they were burned into my consciousness. The last entry, with the strange drawing of the lighthouse and screaming faces, began to disturb me even more. Finding no one inside the lighthouse, we silently returned aboard the Mariana, each lost in thought. The wind suddenly died, and silence enveloped the ship like a dense curtain. I glanced at the GPS. We were on course for home, but the numbers on the screen began to distort as if the electronics were going wild again. Then, the incredible happened. The lighthouse reappeared on the horizon. But how was that possible? We had been moving for an entire hour in the opposite direction. The team on the bridge froze, unable to move, while the lighthouse continued to loom with its deceptively welcoming light. Our captain, a man with 30 years of maritime experience, slowly raised his binoculars to his eyes. He looked for long minutes, then lowered them, pale as a sheet. His lips trembled as he uttered aloud words I would have preferred not to hear.
There are people, or something like that. They are waving at us.
One of the junior officers walked towards the captain's bridge, but suddenly, he stopped. He looked at his hands, flinching at every movement.
I can't control them,
He mumbled as his hands, seemingly on their own, began to set the coordinates for the lighthouse. Panic ensued. We tried to reach the officer, but it was already too late. The vessel, as if possessed, turned toward the lighthouse. All attempts to intervene in the course were in vain. Mariana was headed straight for its doom, led by an invisible hand. At that moment, when it seemed that all was lost, one of the sailors, an elderly man, went to the ship's side. He began to sing a slow, sad melody that filled the air, drowning out the noise of the sea and the wind. We watched him in bewilderment, but somehow his song stopped our movement. The Mariana froze as if confused. The old sailor's song mingled with the voices and the wind, and the invisible force seemed to give up. The lighthouse slowly receded into the distance, and with it, its light faded as if it had never been there. Shocked, we asked him what that song was. He replied,
"It's my great-grandfather's lullaby. He was an experienced sailor and said it would protect him from maritime woes. But I never thought such a thing was possible."
We reached the shore without encountering obstacles, but the diary disappeared from my cabin. No one could remember where it had been left, as if it had never existed or had returned to where it came from, along with the lighthouse, to wait for the next ship and the next unpredictable turn of fate in the dark depths of the ocean. I have always felt an impossible attraction to the sea, that mysterious, ever-changing expanse where the horizon blurs the line between sky and water. But nothing could have foretold that my last voyage on the ship Maritime, sailing from Lisbon to New York, would become my most eerie odyssey. On the third night, after heading out to the open sea, we were engulfed by a storm. Waves, like giants, lifted our vessel on their shoulders and, with ferocious fury, threw it back into the ocean's depths. I stood at the helm when the darkness parted, and suddenly, an unnaturally cold and dense fog surrounded us. It was odd, for fogs usually accompany calms, not storms. But then something even more strange happened. The mist began to vibrate, and from it emanated sounds. The clash of swords, cries and commands of coarse voices. It was similar to the sounds of long-past battles. We looked at each other, not understanding what was happening. It felt like those sounds were imagined, but that wasn't the case. We all heard them. Approaching the side, I saw them, silhouettes of pirates as if carved out of the fog. Their ships, akin to ours but eaten away by time and battles, sailed parallel to us as if following in a parallel reality. Our captain, who had seen much in his life at sea, tried to explain the phenomenon as strange weather conditions, perhaps hallucinations, but his voice trembled as his hands did. All the crew felt it. We were not alone. Soon, amidst the noise of the wind and waves, we began to hear clear orders in an unintelligible language, and, despite our attempts to fend off fear, it seeped into our bones, cold and vicious. We were very afraid. The fog became even denser, enveloping us from all sides. Whispers among the crew spoke of curses and lost souls. Some prayed, others crossed themselves in terror. But all of us simultaneously witnessed the battle of ghosts. Shadows glided across the deck, cold as the sea breeze and silent as death. They passed through us. We saw them, but our hands passed through them as through a mist. One by one, they pointed at us as if choosing who would be next. I hid in my cabin, closed the door behind me, and waited for morning, praying for salvation. When the sun appeared on the horizon again, everything had changed. The fog had dissipated, and not a trace remained of the pirates. But 4 of our crew had vanished without a trace. On the deck, there was no blood, no sign of struggle, only their open books and scattered belongings. We reached New York, but I could never explain what had happened. Sometimes, I think it was all just a dream, a figment of the imagination born from fear and storm. But at night, when I hear the sound of rain on the windows, it seems to me not like droplets, but the whisper of those taken by the fog, calling me back to the ocean.